The war had raged for years. On the frontier world of Rho-Zeta IV, where the sky bled amber in the twilight of perpetual war, trenches cut through the land like scars. The United Terran Defense Corps, UTDC, had been deployed alongside the Zhaari Imperium, a warrior species who valued strength above all else. They fought against the relentless Krogan Dominion, a species bred for brutality. The Zhaari had accepted humanity into their ranks, but only begrudgingly. The humans were weak, frail, inefficient. That's what the Imperium believed. Their war doctrine was simple. The strong fought, the weak died, and those too injured to stand were better off forgotten. The humans, however, did not believe in forgetting their own. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Evelyn Carter, a combat medic, crouched in the mud-soaked battlefield, her hands slick with blood, some human, some alien. Around her, the war still roared, the screams of the dying swallowed by the distant bombardments and the guttural war cries of the Krogan. The smell of burning ozone from plasma fire mixed with the stench of open wounds. Medics worked in tandem, their movements precise and relentless, patching up shattered bones, sealing ruptured arteries with biofoam, stabilizing soldiers who the Zhaari would have abandoned without a second thought. One of them lay before her now, Commander Rithar, a Zhaari officer of considerable renown, writhed beneath her grasp. The deep gash across his torso leaked dark violet blood, a wound his people would have called a death mark. He had snarled at her, demanded she let him die an honorable death. But she had ignored his protests. "Shut up and breathe," she had snapped, voice steel. "You're not dying today." A steady hand worked the surgical tool, the microscalpel weaving past thick sinew. Her other hand injected a cocktail of nanite-infused coagulants, a concoction designed to accelerate clotting and cellular regeneration. The Zhaari had never seen such a thing before. Rithar blinked at her, his breathing ragged. Disbelief flickered in his predatory eyes. "You fight death," he rasped, "as though it is your enemy." She didn't answer. There was no need to. Around them, Zhaari warriors looked on with skepticism, watching their fallen commander be dragged back from the abyss by the hands of a species they had deemed weak. The human medics were not warriors in the traditional sense. They carried no heavy weapons, wore no imposing armor, and yet they defied death itself. It was the first sign that the Imperium had been wrong about them. The air shook as the Krogan launched another offensive, the ground trembling beneath the thunder of their war machines. The Zhaari forces braced themselves for a last stand, convinced the battle was lost. Their injured had already been abandoned, left behind in the trenches, left to be forgotten. The humans, however, refused to retreat. Instead, they moved toward the battlefield, dragging the wounded from the front lines. Medics and combat engineers alike worked together, turning abandoned bunkers into makeshift triage stations, hauling injured soldiers, human and Zhaari alike, into cover. The Imperium watched, stunned. To them this was madness. These creatures, these Terrans, risked their lives for those who should already be dead. That was when the true underestimation began, because what the Zhaari failed to understand was that a human medic is never just a medic. A combat surgeon, trained to save lives under the worst conditions, had the knowledge to keep a soldier breathing or take one apart with equal precision. They could stabilize a failing heart or stop one cold with a flick of a needle. Their understanding of biology, physics, chemistry, it was warfare in its own right. And Evelyn Carter? She was about to teach the galaxy a lesson in survival. The first detonation thundered across the battlefield. A pale green mist hissed as it spread, rolling like a creeping tide through the trenches and over the abandoned wounded. It was a Krogan bioweapon, engineered for total biological breakdown. The Zhaari warriors watching from the safety of their defensive lines said nothing. Their doctrine was clear. The wounded left behind were already dead. The gas only hurried the inevitable. Except, the humans didn't run. Dr. Evelyn Carter's hands were already moving, snatching her scanner from the side pocket of her field pack, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the composition of the mist. The readout was grim. Hemotoxic agents, neurological disruptors, and protein destabilizers. A tailored death sentence. She didn't flinch. "Seal your masks now." The human medics snapped into motion, securing their rebreathers while simultaneously dragging the fallen into cover. Biofoamed wounds were covered with additional polymeric seals, and decontamination injectors were slammed into necks and spines with rapid precision. A dozen steps away, the Zhaari stood frozen in disbelief. This should have been impossible. The gas was designed to kill everything. Everything. Krogan, Zhaari, human. And yet, the wounded that the humans had treated survived. Their bodies resisted the poison, their immune systems, strengthened by Terran counteragents, injected as part of standard battlefield triage. The Zhaari, commander still weak from his own near-death experience, stared in shock. "They should be dead," he muttered. "They would be," another warrior agreed, voice uncertain, "if they were not treated by the humans." And just like that, doubt crept into their certainty. The Imperium had dismissed the Terrans as soft, sentimental. But sentimentality didn't explain why the humans had countered a Krogan bioweapon before it even hit. It didn't explain why the Terran medics were still moving, still saving lives in a place where death was absolute. And for the first time, the Zhaari realized something that filled them with a new kind of fear. The humans weren't playing by the same rules. Evelyn didn't wait for the Zhaari to catch up. The battlefield was still a slaughterhouse, and there was work to be done. Her HUD pulsed as fresh data flooded in, Krogan soldiers advancing, their ranks thick and unwavering. In Xiao, the distant Titan-class siegewalkers rumbled forward, the ground trembling under their weight. They weren't just here to finish the job. They were here to erase any survivors. There were only two choices: retreat and let the wounded be slaughtered, stand their ground, outnumbered and outgunned. No choice at all. Evelyn keyed into the open human comm channel. "Listen up, we're not leaving. Anyone behind?" That means adapting on the fly. Krogan physiology is tough, but I want countermeasures in play before they reach this line. Jackson, prioritize biotoxin neutralizers. O'Connor, rewire our triage shields to block particulate dispersal. We don't have the luxury of hesitation, people. No one hesitated. No one even questioned it. This was what they did. When the Krogan finally reached the human-controlled triage zone, they expected easy prey. They expected weak, dying remnants. Instead, they ran headfirst into something else entirely. The first wave crashed forward, their massive frames towering over the humans. They swung their weapons in wild arcs, confident in their superior strength, until their bodies suddenly seized, convulsed, and collapsed mid-charge. The human counteragents had spread through their ranks, exploiting a genetic vulnerability in their healing factor, something the Krogan themselves had never considered a weakness. Another Krogan stumbled, his regenerative tissue hyperstimulated to the point of internal organ failure. What should have been a battlefield advantage had been turned against them. Panic rippled through the attackers. From their vantage point, the Zhaari watched in stunned silence. The Terrans hadn't won by brute strength. They hadn't overpowered their foes. They had outthought them. Where the Zhaari saw warriors as bodies to be discarded, the humans saw systems to be hacked. Every soldier, every enemy, every life form was a puzzle to be understood, adapted to, and countered, and that made them dangerous in ways the galaxy had never anticipated. The battle ended not with victory, but with an unspoken shift. The Krogan, battered and stunned, pulled back, not from fear but from something deeper. Confusion, disbelief. They had faced countless enemies across the stars, but none who had fought them like this. Evelyn, bloodied, but standing, surveyed the battlefield with quiet intensity. Around her, human medics moved with tireless precision, patching wounds, stabilizing the fallen, preparing for the next inevitable fight. Beside her, Commander Rathar stood, alive because of Terran ingenuity, changed because of what he had witnessed. "You do not fight like warriors," he murmured, voice unreadable. "You fight like something else entirely." Evelyn didn't look at him. She simply packed away her surgical tools. already moving to the next patient. "This is how humans wage war," she said finally. "We don't just fight to kill." She locked eyes with him. "We fight to keep each other alive." The silence after battle was often more unsettling than the chaos itself. Bodies, Krogan, Zhaari, and human alike, lay scattered across the trenches, some still breathing, others already beyond help. The acrid stench of burnt flesh and plasma discharge lingered in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Yet, despite the carnage, the humans moved with calculated urgency, their hands never still. Wounded soldiers were stabilized, severed limbs were cauterized and prepped for cybernetic grafting, and life, wherever it remained, was fought for with relentless determination. Commander Rethar watched them work. The human medics never hesitated. Their hands were covered in blood that was not their own, their faces lined with exhaustion, but not a single one of them stopped moving. This was not the way of the Zhaari. In his culture, a warrior who fell in battle was left behind. The weak were discarded, the wounded were considered lost causes. To waste effort on a dying soldier was to weaken the entire war front. And yet, the Terrans had turned the tide of battle by doing exactly that. They had pulled warriors back from death, defied the natural order, and, in doing so, they had achieved what the Imperium's mightiest war strategists had failed to do. They had forced the Krogan to retreat. For the first time in his life, Rethar questioned his people's ways. The comm channel crackled, and the voice of General Zaven, High Commander of the Zhaari Imperium, rumbled across the open frequencies. "The battle is won. All forces stand down. Humans, your services are no longer required. You will receive no further authorization for medical intervention." Evelyn barely looked up from her patient, a young human soldier whose femoral artery had been shredded. She pressed a coagulant patch to the wound, her hand steady even as fury burned in her chest. "Say that again, High Command." "You have done your duty," the general's voice growled, "but you will no longer interfere. Zhaari, warriors will be tended to by their own, and those too weak to fight will meet an honorable end." The line went dead. Evelyn inhaled sharply, her blood boiling. Around her, the other medics paused, absorbing the implications. The Zhaari Imperium, despite everything they had just witnessed, still refused to change. She turned to Rethar, who stood, rigid, his gaze shadowed with conflict. "You're seriously going to let them do this?" she asked, voice low and sharp. Rethar exhaled, his mandibles tightening. He was torn, she could see it. Torn between his loyalty to the Imperium and the undeniable truth of what he had witnessed. His voice was hesitant. "This is the way of my people." "Then your people are idiots," Evelyn snapped, a murmur of shock rippled through the surrounding Zhaari soldiers, but she didn't care. She had watched too many good people die, had fought too hard to keep these warriors breathing, and now the Imperium wanted to throw them away like corpses rotting on the battlefield. Not on her watch. She turned to her medics. "New orders," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "We keep working, I don't give a damn what High Command says." A beat of silence. Then, one by one, the medics nodded, choosing duty over orders. Evelyn turned back to Rethar. "Are you going to try to stop us?" His mandibles clicked. His entire life had been shaped by the Zhaari doctrine, strength above all, the weak left behind. But now, he was standing before a human woman who had saved his life, who had pulled his fellow warriors back from the brink of death, who had fought not for victory but for survival, and he found that he did not want to stop her. "No," he said finally. "I am not." He turned to his warriors. "Anyone who wishes to be treated, go to the humans. If you choose to die, I will not stop you." More silence. Then, one by one, Zhaari warriors, many of them critically wounded, stepped forward. It was the first act of defiance against their own high command. Word traveled fast. When the Imperium learned that human medics were continuing their work, a detachment of Zhaari enforcers was dispatched to put a stop to it. They arrived in force, heavily armed, their plasma rifles crackling with charged energy. They stormed the human triage zone, weapons raised. Evelyn met them head-on, stepping in front of her people. her blood-stained hands clenched at her sides. "You are in direct violation of Imperial orders," the lead enforcer barked. "Cease this. Interference immediately." Evelyn didn't move. Behind her, human medics continued working, stabilizing a Zhaari soldier whose lung had collapsed. The warrior wheezed, struggling for breath. If the enforcers stopped them now, he would die. She met the enforcer's gaze with cold defiance. "You want to stop us?" she said. "Then you'll have to kill us." A tense pause. The Zhaari enforcer's grip tightened on his weapon. A single order and every human medic here would be reduced to ash. But then, a new voice cut through the standoff. "Lower your weapons." The enforcers hesitated. Rhaethar stepped forward, his gaze burning with conviction. "You will not harm them," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "You would betray your own people?" The enforcer growled. "No," Rhaethar said. "I am saving them." For the first time in Zhaari history, a warrior had sided with a medic over his own military orders, and that act of treasonous loyalty changed everything. Word of Rhaethar's defiance spread through the Zhaari ranks, splitting the Imperium. Some warriors, those who had witnessed firsthand the power of human medicine, joined him. They refused to let their wounded be left behind. Others saw this as an unforgivable betrayal. The Imperium declared the human medics a threat. And just like that, the war changed. What had begun as a war against the Krogan had now become something greater. A battle not just for survival, but for the right to defy death itself. The war zone was a ruin of fire and blood. The sky, once a deep amber, had turned black with the smoke of fallen war machines. The Zhaari civil war had erupted in full force. Warriors who followed the old ways clashed against those who had seen the truth in humanity's methods. And amidst it all, the Krogan returned, driven by fury and desperation. They had suffered a humiliating retreat in their last engagement, and now they came back with only one objective: total annihilation. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood at the center of the chaos, unshaken. The battle raged around her, but she had no weapon in her hands, only a surgical toolkit and a med scanner. She had saved hundreds of lives on this battlefield, and now as the fate of this war reached its breaking point, she would do it again. Because while the warriors clashed in brute combat, she and her medics were waging a war of a different kind, and it was a war humanity intended to win. The Krogan siege battalions thundered forward, their heavy exo-armor reflecting the dying light. Their strategy had been altered. They no longer saw this as a conventional war. They saw it as a biological war. "Deploy the suppression gas," the Krogan warlord growled through the open channels. "No more survivors. Kill them all. Zhaari, human. It doesn't matter." High above the battlefield, dark pods were launched into the sky. They burst apart, releasing a dense crimson mist that billowed across the trenches. Unlike the previous toxin, this one was far worse. Neurotoxic agents, adapted to counteract human and Zhaari immune systems alike. This was the Krogan's ultimate response to the threat of human medics. They could not outfight human medicine, so they would erase the very concept of healing. A perfect weapon, except for one problem. The humans were already ahead of them. Evelyn's hands moved swiftly, activating her combat biochemical interface. The med scanner pulsed, analyzing the new toxin within seconds. Her comlink snapped open. "Jackson, get the counter serum online. O'Connor, prepare a battlefield dispersal. We're overriding this damn bioweapon before it spreads." "Already on it, Doc." There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. The human medics had planned for this. Before the Krogan gas could take hold, human counter-drones launched into the sky, deploying a counteractive mist. The air shimmered as molecular neutralizers dissolved the neurotoxin mid-air. The Krogan did not understand. This was their most powerful bioweapon. It should have been unstoppable, yet the humans were immune before it even reached them. The battlefield turned. One by one, the Zhaari warriors who had chosen humanity's path surged forward, unweakened by the Krogan's attack. Their enemies stumbled, confused. Why wasn't the gas working? The truth struck them too late. The battlefield was no longer theirs. The humans had rewritten the rules, but even as the Krogan fell into chaos, The Zhaari War still raged. The old ways clashed against the new. Zhaari warriors loyal to high command still believed the medics were an aberration, a weakness. They turned their weapons on their own kind, those who had accepted the human way of battle. Rethar stood at the front of the rebellion, his blade drawn against his former brothers. "Enough of this madness," he roared. "Look around you. The humans have saved more warriors than we ever have. They have outlasted the Krogan, outmaneuvered their weapons. And still, you refuse to see the truth?" One of the Imperium commanders snarled, stepping forward. "We are warriors. They are weaklings hiding behind science. They fight against death as though it is something to be feared." Rethar's mandibles flared. "No, they fight for life." The two warriors clashed in a brutal melee, one representing the old, one embodying the new. And as they fought, behind them, the battlefield continued to shift. The medics weren't just healing anymore, they were leading the charge. Cybernetic field augmentations turned injured soldiers into enhanced combatants, their bodies reinforced. With human medical ingenuity, the dying were no longer liabilities, but tactical advantages waiting to return to battle. This was human warfare, not brute force, not senseless sacrifice. This was a war of knowledge, and knowledge was deadlier than any weapon. The Zhaari Imperium forces faltered. Their warriors saw the truth in the chaos. The strongest among them were not the ones who had left, the weak behind, but those who had fought to keep their own alive. High Command realized their mistake too late. The Zhaari forces fractured, some fled, some laid down their weapons, accepting the new path laid before them. And others, those who could not change, were cut down by their own kind. Rethar drove his blade into the heart of the last Imperium commander, his expression unreadable. There was no honor in this death, only necessity. The war within the Imperium was over. The war with the Krogan had ended, and standing at the center of the battlefield, bloodied but unbroken, stood the humans. The battlefield was silent. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the ruins, her hands still covered in blood. The war had ended in a way no one had anticipated. Humanity had not won with force. They had won with science, with stubbornness, with the simple, unshakable refusal to let death claim those it had no right to take. The Zhaari would never be the same again. The Krogan would never underestimate humanity again. And as Evelyn looked toward the future, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy had seen what human medics were truly capable of, and they would never make the mistake of underestimating them again. The battlefield was a graveyard. Rho-Zeta IV, once a contested world of blood and fire, now lay silent under the weight of victory. Smoke curled from the wreckage of Krogan war machines. Bodies lay still in the dust. Some would rise again under the hands of Terran medics. Others would never move again. And standing at the heart of it all, Dr. Evelyn Carter stared at the ruins of two wars, the war against the Krogan and the war within the Zhaari Imperium. She had never been a soldier, but she had fought all the same. The survivors had gathered. Zhaari warriors, those who had once seen their own wounded as lost causes, now stood beside the humans, uncertain but alive. They had watched their own Imperium shatter, had seen their traditions challenged and overthrown. Many still struggled with what it meant. A Zhaari warrior, his arm freshly regrown through Terran cybermedical grafting, flexed his fingers in disbelief. Where once he would have been left to die, the humans had made him whole again. Another, one who had nearly succumbed to the Krogan neurotoxin, glanced at Evelyn with something bordering on awe. You defied death," he murmured. "Even when it came for us." Evelyn shook her head. "No," she corrected. "We didn't defy it." She met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "We just refused to accept it." The Krogan had left. Not defeated. Not crushed, but changed. They had faced a war unlike any before it, one where their biology had been their downfall, where their natural regenerative abilities had been neutralized, studied and countered by a species they had dismissed as fragile. For the first time in centuries, the Krogan had been forced to rethink how they waged war. It left them uneasy, and so they withdrew. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake had cost them dearly. For now they would not return, but they would not forget. The old Imperium was dead. Those who had refused change had either fallen or fled. In their place stood a new Zhaari Imperium, one forged not by conquest but by survival. Rho-Zeta, once a warrior bound by tradition, now stood before his people as something else entirely, not just a commander, but a leader of a revolution. Evelyn watched as the remaining Zhaari looked to him for guidance. Warriors who had once fought to the death without hesitation now hesitated. They questioned, and that, she knew, was the first step toward something greater. Rho-Zeta turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You have changed us, human," he said quietly. "You have shown us that war is not only about strength." Evelyn exhaled. "I didn't come here to change you," she admitted. "I came here to keep people alive." "But you did change us," Rho-Zeta insisted. "And now, we must decide what that means." She didn't have an answer for him, because this wasn't just about the Zhaari anymore. This was about the galaxy. The war had ended, but news of what had happened on Rho-Zeta IV had spread. Across the stars, species that had once ignored humanity now turned their eyes toward Earth with newfound wariness, because humanity had not won with weapons, they had won with knowledge. They had turned medicine into a weapon of survival, had turned biology into a battlefield of its own. And now, the Galactic Council wanted answers. A transmission came through Evelyn's comlink, its signal carrying the weight of political consequence. "Dr. Carter, this is High Chancellor Ormok of the Galactic Council. We have been monitoring the situation on Rho-Zeta IV. She exchanged a glance with Rho-Zeta, then responded. "I assume you have questions, Chancellor." A pause. Then, "The Council is intrigued by the tactical applications of Terran medical warfare. We request your presence at a formal hearing on the matter." Rho-Zeta's mandibles twitched. "A hearing," he repeated. "Or an inquisition." Another pause. "The galaxy is unprepared for what your people have demonstrated, Dr. Carter. Your methods have changed the very nature of war. Some believe that is a strength. Others see it as a threat." Evelyn exhaled. Of course they did. She had expected this, because in the end, this had never just been about one war. It was about what came next. Evelyn closed the channel and looked up at the ruins of Rho-Zeta IV. The air was thick with the weight of what had happened here. She had come to this battlefield as a combat medic, a healer on the front lines. She was leaving as something else entirely. Beside her, Rho-Zeta studied her, carefully. "What will you do?" She sighed, rolling her shoulders, exhausted but not broken. "The same thing I've always done," she said. "Keep people alive." Rho-Zeta's mandibles flickered in what might have been a smile. "You humans," he murmured, "always fighting, even when the war is over." Evelyn smirked. "No," she corrected. "The war is just beginning." And with that, she turned away from the battlefield and toward the future. The galaxy had seen what humanity's medics were capable of. Now they would see what came next. The capital world of the Galactic Council, a shining beacon of civilization, had never felt so hostile. Dr. Evelyn Carter sat in the center of the Grand Chamber, a circular hall of polished steel and ancient stone, where the most powerful beings in the galaxy debated the fate of trillions. Around her, representatives from dozens of species whispered among themselves, their voices laced with uncertainty, with fear, because humanity had changed something fundamental, and now, the galaxy didn't know what to do with them. High Chancellor Ormok, a towering, multi-limbed being with eyes like burning embers, raised a hand for silence. "The events of Rho-Zeta IV have left this council deeply concerned," the Chancellor intoned, his voice heavy with caution. "For centuries, Warfare has been fought with weapons of destruction. But the humans, he turned to Evelyn, have turned medicine itself into a weapon. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some species nodded in approval. Others glared in distrust. Evelyn met the Chancellor's gaze without flinching. Medicine isn't a weapon, she said evenly. It's survival. A counselor from the Zhaari Dominion, a species of insectoid strategists, clicked his mandibles in displeasure. Survival is the most dangerous weapon of all. Another delegate, from the Zhaari Collective, a race of neural-linked scholars, leaned forward. Your medical advancements turned the tide of battle against the Krogan. You countered their biology adapted faster than any other species in history. The Zhaari's bioluminescent eyes pulsed. We wish to learn from you. The Terran Empire, a warlike species snarled from their podium. We wish to contain you. A tense silence. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She had expected this. Some saw what humanity had done and wanted to control it. Others saw a threat, and some saw an opportunity. In the row of visiting delegations, Commander Rethar watched in silence. Once, he had stood among the Imperium's greatest warriors, believing in the old ways, believing that the weak should be left behind. Now he was the first Zhaari warrior medic, a living testament to humanity's influence. He listened as his own people debated amongst themselves, some supporting him, others calling him a traitor to tradition, but he had already made his choice. He stepped forward, voice steady. The Zhaari Imperium will stand with the humans, he declared, not as their soldiers but as their allies. Another ripple of shock ran through the council. The galaxy had never seen the Zhaari bow to another species before. And yet, here was their greatest warrior, declaring humanity as their equal. The balance of power shifted in that moment, and Evelyn knew the galaxy would never be the same. As the council continued its debate, in the farthest reaches of the chamber a silent figure watched, a representative from a species long thought to be extinct, a race that had once ruled the stars, until they were nearly wiped out by war, and now they saw humanity for what they truly were. Not just warriors, not just medics, but something far more dangerous. They smiled, a slow, calculating thing. If humanity has learned to cheat death, they mused, then perhaps they can bring back those who were lost. And in the shadows, the real war began.